YouTube stream. What are you all seeing now? Are you seeing my shared slide?
No, just the OPAC meeting with the whale.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, I think. Zoom just kicked me out, so it stopped my share. But I think we are about ready to go here. Go ahead and hit the record button and share my screen again. Okay, Susan, I think we're good to go. Why don't we go ahead and start?
Okay, sounds good.
I just see a black screen though. Now I see the title slide.
Okay, great.
There we go. I keep getting a notice about the meeting being recorded, so it looks like we're good. Welcome, everybody. Good to see you virtually. This is the OPAC meeting, our spring meeting. We had it delayed from, I think it was March or February. Anyway, welcome, everybody. It looks like we have, about 30, almost 35 people. So I think we have a packed agenda today and a lot to get through and a lot of interest. Just looking at my list, I want to check off what we're doing. So let's see, we started the recording. Just want to run through some quick reminders. My name is Susan Chambers, Chair of OPAC. Quick reminders about logistics for this meeting. For the most part, we try to be on video so the public knows who we are. Obviously, we need to turn off our video sometimes, but helps to let the public know who we are, what we're doing, and help with the recording. So thank you for that for OPAC members. Just a reminder that if you're not speaking, please mute yourselves so that we don't have a lot of background noise. I know my dogs will be barking at some point today because I am expecting a package, so I'm going to keep myself on mute as much as I can. The chat, please don't use it for side conversations.
Well, but if I change the footers, you're going to accept the contractors like.
Thank you, Bob. Anyway, the chat, please don't use the chat for side conversations, but if you have additional information, links to share related to the subject we're talking about, if you need help with technical details or anything, please put those in the chat. What else? We also are streaming this on YouTube, anticipating that we might reach 100 members, which is the limit at which we can do this on Zoom for this meeting. So we may ask people to go to YouTube if they're not providing public comment. We're nowhere near that yet, so far so good. What else? I think that's all I had, and we can go to member introductions. But first, I want to turn to Andy and Andy Lanier, our staff for OPAC, and Tara Brock, our vice chair. Do either of you have any opening comments? Anything I'm missing?
Susan, I think you did great. If you do need help, Amanda McNabb or Eva Krukowski, and they can enter their information in the chat for those of you who may need assistance. And other than that, I think we can move to introduction.
Okay. Tara, did you have anything?
No, I think you covered all our bases. Just a reminder, to keep yourself on mute if you're not speaking, and looking forward to really productive conversations today. So, and I guess I'll just introduce myself while I'm here.
There we
I'm
go.
Sarah Brock. I am Vice Chair of OPAC and representing Coastal Conservation. And perhaps I'll pass it along to our other executive committee members, Jamie Faraday.
Yes, down here on the South Coast as a at-large coastal rep, OPAC.
And why don't we move down the list? I know that Nick Edwards is abroad today, so he's not going to be participating. Do we have Margaret?
Hey, Nishina, Margaret Corby, Lamnos. Hey, Margaret, I'm representing Oregon Coastal Tribes on the call today.
Thank you, Margaret. Richard?
Richard Heap from Brookings, Oregon, and I'm representing the Southern Oregon recreational and charter boat fisheries.
Thank you. Do we have John?
Jonathan Allen, coastal geomorphologist with the Oregon Department of Ecology.
Sorry, just had my connection drop again. We'll get back to where we were. Just one moment. Okay, how about Peggy?
Yes, good morning. Sorry, I was late. I was in another meeting. I'm Peggy Joyce, and I'm a member at large, public at large, and representing those folks who either don't pay much attention to what's going on at the coast or are concerned about it and want to have a representative here.
Hey everybody, my name is Joe Liebesite. I'm representing statewide conservation on OPAC.
Andy, if you're trying to speak, we can't hear you, but I think we're trying to work our way down the member list regardless.
Yep. Next we have Bob Main. Bob, are you there?
Good morning, Susan. Bob Main, Coos County Commissioner.
Good morning, Bob. Thank you. Amelia O'Connor, welcome. I know this is your first meeting. You are taking Charlie Plyben's place. Thank you very much for being here. And can you tell us a little bit about you so we get to know who you are?
Sure. Thank you so much. My name is Amelia O'Connor. I am taking over from Charlie for the non-fishing recreation representative. I am a resident of the Central Oregon coast. I have a background in coastal biology and a master's from marine resource management. I'm also a mother and a very avid surfer on the coast.
Wonderful. Thank you. It's great for you to be here and great to meet you. Who else do we have? David Yamamoto. I don't know if he's here. I know he retired from being a Tillamook County Commissioner, but he is still eligible to be on OPAC until we get a replacement. And I guess he's not here. Okay, moving on. Fran Recht.
Hey, good morning. I don't know why my video stopped. I'm Fran Recht. I am elected city official representative, and I'm in Depot Bay, and I'm the Depot Bay City Council.
Great. Thank you, Fran. Andy, thank you. Ray Monroe, I know will not be here. He has had a family emergency today. So Lisa Assumption, or Laurel Hillman, Oregon Parks and Rec.
Good morning, everybody. Laurel Hillman, Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, sitting in for Director Assumption.
Thank you. Scott Groth.
Good morning, Scott Groth, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, Marine Resources Program.
Thank you, Scott. Karina Nielsen.
Good morning, everyone. Karina Nielsen. I'm at Oregon State University, and I'm the director of the Oregon Sea Grant Program.
Thank you, Karina. Ryan Hoof.
Good morning, everyone. Ryan Hoof here, representing the Department of Environmental Quality.
Thank you, Ryan. Blake Helm, Department of State Lands.
Howdy, folks. Blake Helm, Oregon Department of State Lands. So happy to be here.
Thank you, Blake. Let's see, Karin Power with the Governor's Office. And I can't see my participant list.
I do not see her yet.
Okay, she might be here later. Who do we? Jonathan Allen, Department of Geology and Mineral Industries.
Sorry, I already introduced myself before. John Allen, sitting in for Rory Day-Stewart, Oregon Department of Geology and Mineral Industries.
Thank you. Alexis Taylor.
I don't think she will be joining.
Okay.
Yeah, she's not
Lisa
here.
Phipps.
Lisa Phipps, the manager of the Oregon Coastal Management Program, and maybe Alexis is here after all.
Maybe.
Oh.
Maybe not. I heard something, but okay, we'll come back. Steve Shipsey.
Good morning. I'm Steve Shipsey with the Department of Justice, and I'm counsel to the council. And I'll pass it to Chris Wall.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Chris Wall, representing NOAA's Oceanic and NOAA's Office for Coastal Management with NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and apparently it's a Monday morning.
It is Monday morning, and I know Steve's had his coffee. I have not yet, so this may be interesting. Okay. Did we miss anybody?
I think just staff for DLCD. So maybe
Okay.
I will ask Mandy to introduce herself.
Hello, I'm Mandy McNabb. I'm with the DLCD and Oregon Coastal Management Program. I'm administrative support and coastal rulemaking assistance. If you need any help today with tech support or anything during OPAC, please reach out to me either by chat, or I have also added my email and phone number into chat for you to contact me. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Andy and Eva?
Yeah.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name's Eva Krukowski. I work in a DLCD in the Coastal Division. I'm the Rocky Habitats Project Coordinator. This is my first OPAC meeting, so I'm very happy to be here, and it's really nice to meet all of you.
Great. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Okay, with that, Andy, do you have any other items to note before we move into review and approval of our draft meeting summary?
Yes, I was just going to check with Steve on quorum to make sure that we have enough members here to actually make a motion and take action.
You do, Andy. Thank you for checking.
Great. So I emailed out the draft meeting summary to members of the council. I believe it was last week. Just as a reminder, in September of last year, so thinking all the way back to last fall, the council acted on consensus to approve and recommend all amendments to Part 4 of the Territorial Sea Plan. That was kind of the big action of the meeting. So I think if the council needs a motion and a second in order to approve the meeting minutes, motion second and decision.
I'll make that motion to approve the meeting minutes of the September 8th, 2023 meeting.
And I'll second that motion.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Any discussion or comments from the membership?
And just to be clear, this was for September 2023.
Oh my goodness, yes, sorry. The actual meeting document is correct, but my PowerPoint is wrong.
Exactly. Yeah. It's been a weird year. Any more
And
discussion?
it's circular, right?
Okay, I'm not hearing any, or I'm not seeing any hands, but I can also not see the participant list since I have the chat open. Hang on.
Yeah, Susan, maybe the best way to do this is to, for all members, if you approve the meeting, say yes in the chat.
Yes.
And
That's a
this
good
is for voting members of the council. I'm seeing a bunch of yeses fly through.
Yep. So we have Tara, Joe, Peggy, Richard, Amelia, me,
Fran.
Okay.
Mine doesn't seem to be coming through, but I did vote yes.
Okay. Thank you, Jamie. Okay, I think that is, how many members is that? 1, 2, 3, 6. That's 7. I think Richard and Jamie said yes. Okay, there's Jamie's. 8. So I think that's more than enough for a quorum.
Agreed.
You're correct, Chair.
Okay. Motion passes. We've approved our draft meeting summary from last September. We're good. Next on our agenda was is the governor's office and agency updates, but I don't know if Karen is on yet.
She is. And Karen, you missed introduction, so you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. I'm Karen Power. I'm the Governor's Natural Resource and Climate Advisor. One of 3 folks in our small but mighty team of natural resource policy advisors for the governor. It's really nice to see you all. I have been working most closely with some of your members over the last couple of months around planning and preparing for offshore wind and also supporting DLCD. I asked to join just to give a quick update on how the governor is thinking about offshore wind, but also to say thanks because I know this is a really, really important council for our state. And it has really helped us to be thinking about our the governor's work over the coming years and how ocean policy plays a really important role in preparing for and being resilient to the effects of climate change. So as we are preparing for 2025's legislative session and working with our various different agencies to shape the work that they need to lead over the coming years, I've really appreciated this space with the diverse expertise and geographic expertise. It has been a real source of thought leadership in the past, and we know that you're continuing to do that work around future uses on the ocean too. I'm happy to talk a little bit more around the governor's work. We recently hosted a Western Governors Association Decarbonizing the West conference, where the governor touched on a couple of those resilient themes. And I know you've got a long day ahead of you too with other work too. So I mostly just wanted to pop in. Wish I could have seen you in person. Hope to do that when DLCD is resourced to be able to do that. But wanted to say good morning and be able to help welcome you into this space and appreciate your work here.
Great. Thank you, Karen. It's great to see you. And I know some of us saw you earlier, or well, last week. So great to see you again. Do we have any questions for Karen from the OPAC? you can, just in case you want to raise your hand. I think it's under reactions now, under the Zoom.
I see Peggy raised her hand. Go ahead, Peggy.
Okay, thank you.
This is a question is to Karen. I wonder if you could say something about what the governor's position is on the wind farm idea off the coast.
Sorry, Peggy, somehow I got muted. The work right now on the proposed wind energy areas preceded her administration. The governor has not, well, let me back up a little bit. The governor has appreciated the need to diversify our renewable energy resources. Offshore wind may or may not play a role in our energy mix in the future. She appreciates that this is a federal agency process that they are embarking on around the country, something that's also being pursued globally in an effort to get off of non-renewable fuels. She, however, has appreciated that the state needs to help shape its own approach towards offshore wind. That is why she's been supporting the development of a roadmap, supported that during the legislative session, has been working to make sure that our agencies are resourced in order to meet the federal process and be able to provide strong state input. She also sent a letter to BOEM last week asking that before they move ahead with construction of any projects to make sure that the state has adequate time to complete its roadmap process and adopt any necessary recommendations first.
And is BOEM going to accommodate that request?
We're in conversations with them about the timeline and underscoring the importance that community members and other stakeholders have an opportunity to weigh in and help shape a state approach first.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. Thank you, Karen. Any other OPAC members have any questions for Karen? Joe, go ahead, Joe.
Hey, Karen, good to see you. You know me. I just want to just point out that this agenda today, we're talking a lot about offshore wind, and OPAC will be having a discussion at 1 p.m. On it, in particular about the roadmap and the process. So I know you're busy, but it doesn't sound like you can stay the whole time, but if you can come back during that 1 o'clock session, that'd be really helpful because you may be able to provide some input at that point as we discuss the roadmap. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Joe. I'm going to try to cram my meetings into that 15-minute break at 10:15, but I plan to be here for most, if not all of the day, as much as I'm able.
Excellent.
Thank you. Margaret.
Yeah, my question is just to ask, so I'm the tribal representative for the coastal tribes on OPAC. I just wanted to know how the governor's office is considering the comments of tribes and perspectives of tribes in kind of the roadmap process and other, I don't know, other office actions around offshore wind.
Thanks, Margaret. Our office is beginning to initiate consultation with the tribes. And I and Bobby Cochran are beginning to meet with each tribe. I sent out letters to each of our federally recognized tribes. And Bobby Cochran, who's been leading the informal group from Oregon Consensus, also reached out to adjacent states to make them aware of the roadmap. So we are beginning those individual conversations, I think, in the next week and a half. Start of a longer process, for sure. Thanks, Margaret.
Thank you. Fran, go ahead.
Good morning, Karen. I'm a city councilor in Depot Bay representing city governments on OPEC. I believe I read that Oregon is not meeting its climate targets. What other actions is Oregon taking right now to beef up our climate readiness and meeting goals?
Thanks, Fran. First, thanks for your local city council leadership. The Climate Action Commission, which used to be known as the Global Warming Commission, completed their report at the end of 2023. Their analysis showed that if the state fully implements all of its programs, we are on track to meet our 2030 greenhouse gas reduction goals. We are not currently. But one of those key pillars of the state's programs was struck down by the court on a technicality, a rulemaking procedural technicality in December. So DEQ is working hard to repromulgate its program and correct that procedural error this year. That's also something that I'm spending a lot of time with DEQ staff on to get stood up again and evaluate. It reduces emissions from fossil gas and fuels at the pump over time. So Fran, a lot of different work happening at a lot of different agencies and in local government too, as you know.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fran. Thank you, Karin, for answering all those questions. Anybody else have a question for Karin before we move on? Okay, I am not seeing any hands. Oh, Julie, go ahead.
I'm Julie Seastrom, Hannes Coos, and Tribal Council for the Confederated Tribes of the Coos, Lower Uncon, and Siuslaw. And I'm a visitor today. I'm not on the OPAC. I just had a follow-up question about the comment that you were speaking about, where you have a letter sent to BOEM asking them to double check the roadmap, which the governor has written, and make sure that they don't move forward until the roadmap is completed. And you said that you're in discussion with them as far as whether or not they're going to respond with a pause or a stop in their process. And I just wondered if they had given you a timeline as to when they're going to respond. It's going to be a week from now, a month from now, a couple days. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Julie. To underscore, the governor has asked for BOEM to ensure that there's plenty of time, adequate time for the state to complete its roadmap process before they move ahead with any projects. She understands it's a separate federal process happening right now with the leasing activities, but she wants to make sure that our state has a strong voice in that now and in the future. The federal agency received the letter last week. They acknowledged receipt. I don't know what kind of timeline they're going to turn around a response by, but she strongly urged them to make sure that we, as a state, have an adequate time over the coming, next few years to complete this process. I'm happy to follow up, Julie. Rick has usually been my point of contact and let you know when we hear a response.
The only reason I ask is because of the track record so far that we have in our discussions with BOEM is that they have been able to establish turnaround timelines for us to respond to different questions they have and engagement times that they have. But then when we ask them questions, they're not so quick to turn around. So I'm just concerned that they respond to the governor in a timely manner. So that was my concern for the question.
Thanks.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Karin. I forgot. I'm sorry. I meant to ask OPAC members if there was any more comments or questions for Karin. And just to note that we do have a public comment period set for noon. And Andy did put a note in the chat. Anybody who would like to provide public comment at noon, please put your name in the chat so Andy can keep a running tally of who all would like to provide public comment, and so we can get an estimate of time to so we can accommodate everybody. So thank you for that. And thank you, Tara, for that suggestion. I forgot to mention that about public comment. Okay. Any other questions from OPAC members for Karin before we move on? And I'm not seeing any hands up. So Andy, what do we have next on our agenda? I think agency updates.
Yeah, Scott, growth.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Thanks, Susan. I just have a couple updates from ODFW. One is related to the listing of southern resident orcas, and the other is just a brief on House Bill 4132 that expands our Marine Reserves program a little bit. So first, the southern resident orcas. This is obviously same as killer whales. They have a small and declining population, about 50 to 100 animals since the 1960s. They're currently at about 75. And we listed those under our state listing as endangered. That matches the federal ESA listing and Washington's listing. Those animals live primarily in the Salish Sea, and that was their critical habitat for years. And recently their full range was included into critical habitat, which goes from the Canada border down to northern California, which obviously includes all the Oregon coast from 6 meters out to 200 meters out. They are animals that live long lives. Males will live an average to 17, females to 29, obviously a lot more in captivity and other circumstances. I guess a key part of their biology that affects this listing is they eat primarily Chinook salmon. So as we all know, it's been tough times for Chinook salmon in recent history. So that's kind of their main threat. And Columbia River salmon obviously are crucial to that, especially springers coming out of there. So the threats, aside from that lack of prey, which is really the big one, include also noise disturbance and environmental contamination. One threat that they no longer have is those whales were originally harvested for aquaria in the 60s, and that was the first real big ding to their population. You know, it's kind of an important note just to think if you wanted a killer whale and if you want to get in the water with it, you'd want a fish-eating killer whale, which is what they are. So the forecast for those guys is not very good. The trend is declining, and the models that we looked at showed almost every scenario to be decline. So the things that we're doing to try to help those whales is making more fish, both on the primarily habitat side, but also hatchery side. This listing does give some additional teeth to noise reduction and contamination reduction. So that's southern resident orcas. Onto House Bill 4132. This relates to marine reserves and was implemented based on OPAC recommendations based on our marine reserves team's decadal review. It directs ODFW to partner with our commission, DSL, and other state agencies to develop an adaptive management plan, and that plan should include components of social science. So just a little bit more specific about those mandates. It specifies the content of the adaptive management plan to include monitoring research, social impacts, long-term sampling protocols, data collection and evaluation, as well as outreach and education. It does eliminate a couple of things, including the work plan requirement to provide territorial sea baseline data. I think that was a matter of housekeeping, if I remember right. And it also eliminates provisions restricting our commission from making decisions on fishing associated to marine reserves data. It does require continued community engagement, and it requires that community and fisherman knowledge is incorporated into the ongoing research and monitoring efforts. So sort of the last thoughts I have on this is sort of the brass tacks of this. It adds $800,000 a budget from the general fund each biennium, which funds three positions. One is a quantitative ecologist, and that person will be working on the adaptive management plan, analyzing the data, obviously, doing a little field work and increasing our collaborations. We're adding an economist, and this is new for us, to do some economic research and work with our Human Dimensions project leader and expand our communications. The last permanent position is reinstatement, essentially, of the outreach and engagement position, and that's particularly relates to the adaptive management plan, and obviously has the key goal of continuing that work with community groups. And lastly, there is also money for a Oregon Sea Grant Fellow, which our Marine Reserves program has had in many years and has worked out nicely. So that's the 30,000 foot view of those two ODFW issues that pertain to this group. So thanks.
Thank you, Scott. Do any OPAC members have questions for Scott? Tara.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for coming and providing those updates. Really important, I think, for us to hear about the follow through on marine reserves, given OPAC's advocacy around those issues over the last couple of years. I had a question related to the listing of southern resident orcas. Do you envision or see any role for this council or any of the agencies, obviously ODFW, but other agencies on the council in developing those species management plans for the state?
That work will be challenging because we don't have a cetacean biologist at ODFW. We have a marine mammal program that mostly deals with pinniped issues. So we've been sort of feeling our way through that, but I would expect, groups like this to be good allies in developing that. I don't know what exactly that might look like, though.
Go ahead, Scott.
I was just, that's all I had for that, Tara.
Karina's hand go up.
There we go. Thank you. Karina.
Great, thank you. Good morning. Thanks, Scott, for the update. I may have missed it, but I'm just wondering what plans there are perhaps for tribal engagement or collaboration in the Marine Reserves program, whether that's monitoring or the human dimensions piece, et cetera.
Sure. I don't have specifics on that aside from specifically, I know that's a goal and that's a capability that'll be strongly increased with the outreach component. But those positions, we're just, going through the administrative rigmarole of implementing those positions. And that has been a key goal of that program. So I would expect with new capacity, we hope to do that more.
Thank you.
Thank you. Peggy, followed by Richard Heap.
Yes, thank you. Scott, I wonder if you can tell me, is there any kind of research or any kind of study going on to assess the impact of the wind farms that are being proposed by BOEM along the coast?
Yeah, thanks, Peggy. There's quite a bit of research proposed. There's I know OSU has made several efforts to get money and has towards that research. But obviously the BOEM process and the leases process itself is crucial to that. And we've made a list of study recommendations and plan to continue working with that. So that's sort of ongoing, but certain to understand those effects.
It feels to me, or at least it's hitting me, as BOEM is like on a fast track to get sites leased, to get stuff going, and it's not taking into account any of the issues that are being raised at the meetings that I've sat in, including listening sessions down the coast about what is going to be the impact of these farms, of these wind farms on the environment within the sea that is already being degraded.
Yeah, agree with you, Peggy. And to that point, you know, that's really why the governor's office, I think, I won't speak for Karin, but I think that the development of a roadmap kind of facilitates the clear understanding of what we're getting into. And I would expect that that was a fundamental reason to kind of push for that as they have.
I guess I'm skeptical about whether BOEM is going to pay any attention to that or to grant Oregon the time needed to come up with that kind of a framework. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Peggy. Thank you, Scott. And I think some of those questions will come up again later today, so I appreciate that. Richard, and then we should probably move on our agenda. Go ahead, Richard.
Well, Scott, is it the agency's intention to publish comparative data on fished areas versus marine reserves showing the population levels and species composition in each?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Absolutely. That is a key item that's in the decadal report, but that's central to our goals to understand reserve effects there. So that monitoring is ongoing, and there's published work in the decadal review to show that also.
Okay. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the questions and the update and the discussion. We should probably move into our next agenda item. So I'd like to turn it over to Vice Chair Tara Brock to talk about the Oregon Sea Grant Program Letter of Support. And maybe also ask Dr. Karina Nielsen to talk about it after Tara provides an introduction.
Great, thank you, Susan. Yes, in a couple months ago, the executive committee received some information and an update on the proposed presidential budget cuts that would affect the Sea Grant programs nationally, and how important advocacy at the state and local level is for those programs. OPAC has written letters in the past to the governor's office on this issue when there are funding cuts coming to programs that are really integral to our work. So we put together a letter of support, understanding the quick timeline around that. The executive committee wrote a nice letter to the governor's office, encouraging them to advocate against those budget cuts in the federal process, in the congressional process. So the letter was in our meeting materials. It was distributed to all OPAC members. But if there's any specific questions on the letter or content, happy to answer those. I think some of the things that were really acute to me were the stats that Sea Grant provided us, that they contributed almost 7,000 hours of service last year, engaged over 91,000 people, including 32,000 students and 293 educators in the state. So really a very important role, not only in the science to help back up so much of the good policy we do here, but also the engagement with the communities on the coast and making sure that we continue to engage people on the science and importance of our ocean ecosystem. And then on the actual funding side of things, about 95% of the federal funds that Sea Grants programs receive go to the state programs to help support this. And for every dollar they get of federal funding, they are able to leverage that into $3 more. So really just great work all around at the Sea Grant program, and wanted to lend our support. And yes, Director Karina Nielsen here today. I want to pass it over so that she can also speak more to these issues and anything else you might want to add.
Great, thank you very much, Tara, and with appreciation to the Executive Committee and OPAC for providing the letter of support. In the past year, we were fiscal year 24, budget just passed, we were sort of fully funded at our status quo level. And what's being proposed for fiscal year 25 in the president's budget is to remove all the funding for aquaculture. This is the whole network, right, across the nation, not just Oregon, but the base budget also to be reduced by about 10%. If I were to translate that into personnel, that's about there's grant funding that we send out through the aquaculture program that would disappear. A lot of that's around the sustainable red seaweed work, some of the kelp restoration work. So there's a variety of ways that aquaculture funding plays out in Oregon, supporting our oyster industry as well. And then the base budget would translate into about one per full FTE, which is a pretty big thing to absorb. So that's what it would mean for Oregon. We wouldn't necessarily cut a person, but that just for equivalency, so you understand the magnitude. So we have been asking and getting a lot of good support from our stakeholders and our folks who are interested in supporting our program, our partners. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that actually there are a variety of cuts to NOAA programs, not just Sea Grant, so I'll speak a little bit more broadly. The IUS program, the Ocean Observing Program, is slated for some pretty big budget cuts, and the cooperative institutes, of which Oregon State has one, are also slated for some pretty heavy budget cuts. So that's unfortunate. My understanding is they're going after NOAA's trying to balance that with the expenses of an observing satellite. So, hard choices. But that's the way the budget proposal has been laid out. So appreciative for the support. Happy to take any additional questions folks might have. Oh, I'm going to slip in one last item. We were able to hire this year someone to help with community engagement on offshore wind issues in Oregon. And I know she's sitting in the meeting. I just want to face to name recognition. Sarah Sweat is joining us as an extension specialist in marine renewable energy and communities. And Sarah, I don't know if you want to just turn your camera on and wave your hand. So people can
Sure.
see.
Hi, everyone.
That's Sarah. So we welcome her. And that, just for full transparency, has come from funding through the Department of Energy to the National Sea Grant Program. So that's a separate line. So thank you.
Thank you, Karina, and welcome, Sarah. I'm sure we'll be seeing more of you. I'm sure the communities will be seeing a lot more of you as well. So glad to have you here. Is there anything you'd like to tell us about your background?
Sure, I'll give a quick little brief background about myself. I studied marine bio, and then I kind of pivoted to marine policy, and I just wrapped up my master's, and the past 2-3 years of research have been participatory, community-based research projects I've been working on, and in the past 2 years, those have been focused on the human dimensions of offshore wind in southern New England. So, yep. Thanks for having me today.
Wonderful. Thanks for being here. It sounds like you have some good experience that we can learn from you, and you can learn from us, and it'll be good. So appreciate that.
Thanks.
Chris, you have a question.
Hi, I just need to make a quick statement. Because I'm a federal employee, I just need to note that I'll be abstaining from this discussion or part of the conversation at all. And if a letter of support does move forward, I need to either ask to have my name removed from the letter and letterhead, or have it clearly noted that I did abstain from this part, just for requirements there. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Andy or Steve, any suggestions on how we should address that?
Yeah, in the past, I have just removed Chris's name from the letterhead, and I
Okay.
will do that as well in this instance.
Okay. Thank you, Andy. Okay, moving on to our next agenda item. We have our next agenda item is Jean Thurston Keller will be talking about the BOEM Oregon Offshore Wind Energy Leasing Process update. Before we get to that, I do want to ask Jason Searman from the Oregon Department of Energy to introduce himself. he is not a member of OPAC, but he is clearly deeply involved in Oregon energy issues. So Jason, would you like to turn on your camera and say hello?
Hi, everybody. I can't tell if I'm on, but I think
Yep,
I
we
am.
got you.
Jason Zimmerman, Oregon Department of Energy. Folks probably have seen me in a few different venues over the years. I'm part of the BOEM Oregon Task Force that Andy basically leads and interfaces with Gene on as the state rep, and I'm kind of number two behind Andy, I guess, or another key state rep on that task force. I put together a good study a few years ago with a lot of great input from people on this OPAC council and the agency folks you heard from, like ODFW and Andy and the DLCD group as well. So encourage people to find that on the Oregon Department of Energy website if they'd like to read a little bit more. And we're also embarking on some new efforts with a state energy strategy. And I can put the link to that in the chat for folks to follow too. And that's going to look at a bunch of resources, not just offshore wind, but evaluate, where Oregon's at currently, how much more load is coming to the state in terms of new industry and population, and what are the weather effects doing to our energy demand, and how can we meet that with clean energy as best we can. So I'm putting my plug in for that. But if any questions come up, I'm just kind of here to support today. So I'm here. If any questions are on the energy sector, happy to help. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jason. I know that report was really well done. I've referred to it a few times in some other meetings I've been in. So if you could, I don't have that link handy, but if you could put that link in the chat, that would be great. Thank you. Next up, Jean Thurston Keller. Welcome, Jean.
Hi, thanks, Susan. Good to be here again. I know it's been a few months, and I'm looking forward to giving you guys a overview of what BOEM's been doing and answer any questions that you might have. So my name is Jean Thurston Keller. I am the Oregon State Lead for the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. Next slide, please, Andy. So 3 parts to our presentation this morning. Quick overview on Oregon's offshore wind activities, an update on our environmental assessment of the final wind energy areas, and then outlook and next steps in BOEM's process. Next slide. So I wanted to start with a quick terminology review for those of you that I haven't spoken to recently. So first we have a call for information nominations, we often call a call. And this is really, it does 3 things. The first thing it does is it describes areas that BOEM is looking at for potential future leasing activities. The second thing it does is ask for public comment on those areas. And then finally, we look at nominations of interest from potential offshore wind developers. So it does those 3 things. We published a call in April of 2022 for Oregon. The next terminology I wanted to review was a wind energy area. So this is not necessarily an area that would be leased in the future, but it's a basis for leasing. And so it's an area that is within a call area that's been identified by BOEM for an environmental review. So this is an area that's been winnowed down to, we're going to do an environmental review on these areas. And then finally, it's a lease area. And these are areas that BOEM would offer for lease during a lease sale. So it's kind of a winnowing iterative process where we go from call to a wind energy area to lease areas. Next slide. So what has BOEM been doing in Oregon? So this is a quick review of things that we've done. So we established a task force with Oregon in 2011. First few task force meetings, as some of you may remember, I know Susan does, we worked on the Windfloat Pacific project, which was a proposed project that was using some new technologies at the time. And that project did not move forward because it could not secure a power purchase agreement. And so we had a little break. And then in 2019, we gathered back together again to really focus on potential offshore wind planning. So not just reacting to projects that may come up, but doing a proactive approach to try and understand where would be the most appropriate areas for potential leasing activities. And so based on task force discussions in 2019 and 2020, BOEM and the DLCD worked on developing the Offshore Wind Map, which is a planning tool that we provided through joint work with DLCD to really show the public and have it publicly accessible, the data and information that BOEM is using to inform its process of winnowing down those areas. And so part of the task force input was in the development of the Offshore Wind Map and also on developing a draft engagement and stakeholder outreach plan, which we did in 2020 and 2021. That was during the time of COVID, so there was a lot of virtual meetings. It kind of moved us from really having some on the coast type of meetings to, well, we're going to have to do this virtually, and we all became experts or semi-experts in Zoom and everything else. And so what came out of that public outreach and engagement was we developed 2 areas offshore. It says Southern Oregon, but it's more South Central-ish. Call for information nominations on these 2 areas we called Coos Bay and Brookings because they were near those respective cities. And so based on comments that we received during the call, which was for formal public comment, we received a lot of comments that we needed to partner with NOAA's National Center for Coastal Ocean Sciences to use a new spatial suitability modeling process to identify the least conflicted areas. And so we did that. We also incorporated in our process a new public engagement step, which was before we determined final wind energy areas, which we have done in other states, we would have instead draft wind energy areas, and we would have those for public comment and review. So we published those in 2023. And the draft wind energy areas and the draft NCOS, or National Center for Coastal Ocean Sciences, report on that spatial suitability modeling process was published in August of 2023. It was originally for a 60-day public comment period, but we extended it to 75. And then we announced the final wind energy areas and the finalized NCOS report in February of 2024. And also at that time, we published a notice of intent to prepare an environmental assessment on the final wind energy areas. And outreach and engagement has been ongoing. We're working with tribes, the fishing community, and affected communities throughout the planning process, especially, working with the state on their offshore wind roadmap as well, just learning more about what the state envisions for that. So that wraps up background. We can go to the next slide, please, Andy. Okay, so these are the final wind energy areas. So outlined in dark blue and light blue are those 2 call areas that I identified for you offshore Coos Bay and Brookings. The draft wind energy areas, Coos Bay remained unchanged from the draft wind energy area to the final wind energy area. But the Brookings final wind energy area was slightly different from the draft wind energy area for Brookings. So the draft had that hatched blue going all the way down to the bottom line of the call area. So it was slightly larger in acreage, same distance from shore, but the acreage was removed because of conversations that we had with NOAA on a survey corridor that occurs in that area that is for the US-Canada HAIC survey, as well as several other surveys that are very critically important to NOAA in determining salmon stock recovery efforts. And so we removed those. 2 things that I really want to point out is that we really worked hard to avoid fishing as much as possible. It is really hard to avoid fishing in Oregon because it occurs in many places offshore Oregon. And so what we did is we really worked with NOAA and DLCD to understand the data that we had. So the best available data to NOAA and to ODFW. And they gave us some recommendations for exclusion, and we avoided 98% of the areas that not the DLCD, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, as well as NOAA recommended that we not consider for leasing. So 98% of that was avoided. Next slide. So BOEM, most of you are aware that we follow the National Environmental Policy Act, and you're very familiar with it. BOEM is currently reviewing the final wind energy areas under NEPA through an environmental assessment. So there are also several consultations that BOEM is required to do under NEPA. Those include the National Historic Preservation Act, which requires BOEM to take into account the effects of undertakings on historic properties. But also we're required to complete a consistency determination with the Coastal Management Program for Oregon. So under compliance with the Coastal Zone Management Act, so we're working with the Department of Land Conservation and Development on that. And then also the ESA Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act. We're working with NOAA, NEMS, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And then finally, Magnuson-Stevens, also working on accessional fish habitat. So this EA is really looking at 3 key items. First is lease issuance. So BOEM is issuing a lease. So what are the potential impacts associated with that lease? Because this lease does not allow any construction activities to occur, we are looking at the reasonably foreseeable actions, which are site assessment, which is the installation of meteorological buoys in order to understand what the wind resource at a particular site would be. So it's assessing the wind resource. It's a good way to kind of remember that acronym that BOEM uses with site assessment. And then also site characterization activities. So these are the survey activities that would be done to further understand the particular characteristics of a site. So, you know, we need to have from the developer or potential developer a lot of data and information specifically on these areas. And that information is necessary for them to be able to identify like what type of turbines they're going to install, what type of anchoring system they're going to use, how they're going to get the cable to shore. They have to do a lot of surveys to really understand what's the tensile strength of the seabed. So you're looking at side scan sonar and other activities associated with that. And then also bird surveys, you know, more marine mammal surveys to add to existing desktop information. So they really need to gather that data and information together to get to the next step, which would be to submit a construction and operations plan to BOEM. That's where we would have the detailed information in order to evaluate what they are proposing. So they don't even tell us what they're going to propose until they provide that survey data to us. And so we are not considering in our environmental assessment the construction and operations because they're not allowed to do it yet. So we wait until we get a project plan, which is a construction and operations plan, before we would do those evaluations. And that's our process that we have approved under Congress. So that's part of our regulatory process. Next slide, please. So the proposed actions in NEPA, I kind of discussed this a little bit. You know, the EA is not evaluating construction of any projects at this time. It's evaluating the federal action, which because we don't allow construction, it's really to issue a commercial wind energy lease. Some people have asked me, so do they get to do oil and gas or anything other than that? And the answer is no. This is for wind only. So it would be areas within federal waters, within the wind energy areas that might be used for energy production, collection, and transmission of wind only. Second are those site characterization activities, the activities to identify the character of the site, you know, the biological, geophysical, and geotechnical, as well as archaeological surveys, of course. And then finally, site assessment activities. I like to differentiate it between characterization to assessment, as it's assessing the wind potential at a site. So that's necessary for them to understand what would be the height of the turbines, what's the best wind speed at a particular height. And to do that, you really need to have LIDAR, which is light detection and range, on survey buoys, which are very similar in design to, say, NOAA weather buoys. Next slide. So we just closed the public comment period on the environmental assessment. Comments were really equally distributed among many topics that you see here. Tribal input was also received. Not necessarily all of it was public. Some of it is with our government-to-government consultations with the tribes. That's discussing private matters. So as you can see, there is a large other category. I don't have all of the specifics on the other, but it covered a multitude of items, most especially the ones that you see here. So a lot of comments weren't specific to one particular category. Someone who submitted a comment about commercial fishing oftentimes was interested in the public comment process and what engagement BOEM has done to date. They were also concerned about birds and bats. And so a lot of those overlapped each other. But these are the broad categories. And these are all available for review and publicly accessible on regulations.gov. The docket number, which is the one you would enter into the search box, is 2023-0065. So we received 127 submissions. And, I'm sure there's probably a lot of questions on these. I'm not the NEPA coordinator, but I can certainly direct you to the specific NEPA coordinator for answering those particular environmental questions. Next slide, please. So what's BOEM outlook and next steps? So we anticipate publishing in our leasing process a proposed sale notice, which is the next step in BOEM's regulatory process. When we do publish a PSN, we would also send to the state's coastal management program a copy of our federal consistency determination for the review by the state. That is led by the DLCD. The PSN, I want to point out, is a separate process from the environmental analysis, in that it will initiate discussion of defining terms and conditions on a future offshore wind lease sale. The comments we receive will culminate in a final sale notice, which could lead to a lease auction. If we publish the proposed sale notice in late April, here's the scheduled timeline for the environmental assessment to be completed. The state has a regulatory review timeline under the Coastal Zone Management Act for the consistency determination. So depending on if they take an extension or not under the regulatory rules, that could extend into July. So I have those as generalized months. We don't have dates because these haven't been published yet, and we don't have the particular dates yet. But that's the average timeline for those reviews. And then we are committed to publishing the final environmental assessment for the public to review. And then we are required under our regulatory process to have a minimum 30 days prior to a lease sale for publication of a final sale notice. A final sale notice is an actual announcement of what would be the final auction format that has been decided based on comments we received during the proposed sale notice review. That's not actually a formal public comment period. So I want to be emphasizing that the final sale notice is an announcement of what's been BOEM's final decision on the leasing auction process. So is it a multi-factor process? If it is, then what sort of community benefits, agreements, maybe requirements under that auction format? And then this could lead us to a potential lease auction in October of 2024. That's probably the fastest I think that this process could move. So I want to be forthcoming that these are anticipated timelines. These are not formal commitments. This is just what the process would look like if we publish a proposed sale notice at the end of this month. So with that, I'll go to the next slide and conclude by saying thank you for inviting me. I know that the OPAC is a very important part of what Oregon does, and I've worked with Andy and Susan for years, and I look forward to your questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Jean. I appreciate that. Always good to have a bit of history for those of us who weren't as closely and as involved with offshore wind. So that was a very good synopsis. I do have one question for you, and then I see we have at least one hand from Joe Libezite. So my question to you is, when you're talking about releasing the draft EA and getting comments on that, so I'm looking at, I think you said the draft EA would be the end of April. So with a 30 to 60 day comment period, so that would take it into June, April, May, June. With a final EA coming out in July, how does BOEM incorporate any of the comments from the draft EA into the final EA in that short of a time frame?
No, sure, that's a great question. Again, these are anticipated timelines, depends on the length of the comment period. I went with the standard BOEM public comment period that we would typically use, which would be 30 days. Again, these are subject to change based on if we extend comment periods or not. It does take time to incorporate all of the comments that we receive, and it depends on the number of comments. We only received 127, which is a lot of comments on the scoping period, but we've also received, I think we received over 1,100 for the draft wind energy areas. So it really depends on the number of comments we receive. So that's why I say it's an anticipated timeline, but we are not committing to dates today. Thank you, Susan.
Okay, thank you, Jean. Okay, any other OPAC members have questions? Please raise your hand. It's under the reaction symbol. So I have Joe followed by Jamie Faraday. Go ahead, Joe.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Jean, for the update. Appreciate that. One thing I wanted to hear from you more about is the environmental community over a number of years provided many comments to BOEM, representing many thousands of constituents in Oregon. And also from, the fishing industry, I've heard a lot of this same concern, and from the tribes as well, is the fact that the BOEM process does not set us up in a way to really evaluate impacts, potential impacts from intended lease sales and eventual development, from cumulative impacts to and to fish, moving fish that will potentially cross several different wind energy areas, whales, birds, and other critters that are going to be moving across these developed areas. And we just have not heard from BOEM on how they're going to take into account any kind of cumulative impacts analysis. And we know we've put forward the recommendation, programmatic environmental impact statement, but BOEM has pretty much not responded to that. So I want to hear from you how we can be assured in Oregon, and maybe even across the whole West Coast, that the potential development that will happen at multiple wind energy areas across the West Coast will be taken into account in such a way that we can really get a handle on what types of cumulative impacts there will be on wildlife, marine wildlife, the ocean bottom, fish, and other factors. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Joe. And BOEM has heard that before. And so we responded to that with California. So in California, we are doing a programmatic EIS. So we don't have any lease areas in Oregon yet. We may in the future. Right now we have wind energy areas. So there's no guarantee that these areas will be developed future leasing activities. So the environmental analysis may come back that says, no, we're not going to lease in those areas. We could have consultations that say otherwise. we have other reviews and that are required to be completed before they would become lease areas. And they're not even leased until after the auction process. And so in California, we also did not look at cumulative impacts. And we had lease areas. So at that point, we knew where for certain the potential construction activities could occur in the future. And so knowing that, then we were able to move forward with, okay, we have areas that have been leased, they are finalized, we know this, so we can now evaluate those for cumulative impact. So that's what we're doing in California on the 5 lease areas that we have identified there, of which you're aware we have some in Humboldt, which is fairly close to the Oregon waters. And so I would anticipate in the future that is something that we would likely consider. But right now we only have wind energy areas that are subject to environmental review. So we don't have certainty at this time. But looking at California as an example, I think that's highly likely.
Yeah, just to follow up, we did comment on the California PEIS and recommended extension to Oregon and Washington. And I know that you have to do it in a way that when you have a better understanding of where those actual infrastructure will be. But, I just want to say that that's really important. So regardless of whether you know the exact locations or not, that needs to be part of the plan moving forward. And there needs to be some type of promissory agreement with BOEM that type of cumulative impacts assessment across the entirety of the eventual wind energy areas, once we know them, that should be part of the plan. And I think a lot of people on OPAC would agree, but I'll just stop there and pass it on to the next OPAC member.
Thank you, Joe. I have Jamie followed by Fran. Go ahead, Jamie.
Yeah, hi, Gene. Could you give us a characterization of the duration of the bidding window? I couldn't quite get that from your discussion in this one, but that and the other question is it likely or possible that no bids are forwarded for either of these wind energy areas? And what would you do if that happened?
Okay, I've got a question on the bidding window and then a question on what we would do if bidding doesn't occur. I capture those. Okay, so for the bidding window, I apologize that I did not mention under our regulatory process, the proposed sale notice has a 60-day public comment period. And so during that 60-day public comment period, we would look at the state and the public's recommendations for final bidding credits. Bidding credit is a non-monetary form that is combined with a cash bid. So if we hold an auction, what happens is a developer could say, I want to provide X amount of dollars for a lease area. And BOEM would, as part of the bidding credit scheme, which is a schematic, not a scheme. Let me clarify my terminology. Under that process, BOEM would incorporate bidding credits, meaning that they don't have to pay cash. They have a non-monetary promise that is binding, that they would work with like community benefit agreements. So some of the things that we've done in the past that BOEM is looking at for Oregon would be what we did for California, which was a workforce training and supply chain bidding credit, where money would be going towards development of the floating offshore wind supply chain as well as workforce. So you're looking at, jobs and what those could look like. And then another bidding credit that we're looking at is a lease area use community benefit agreement, which would be people who use the geographic space would have a bidding credit. So that would be something that would be developed in order to like compensate or mitigate potential impacts associated with future project development on individuals or users of that lease space. And then another one is a we used in California, which was a general community benefit agreement. So looking at local community benefits. So, communities that are directly affected by offshore wind development, that they would have different programs or initiatives. What those would look like, I don't know at this time. That really depends in the future. But those are some of the things that we're looking at. Also related kind of to bidding window is kind of how long an auction occurs. It's usually 1 day. Sometimes it's 2, depending on the number of people who bid on an auction. We also asked during the proposed sale notice if anyone else is interested in bidding on the potential areas. So right now we have 4 that were interested from the call for information and nominations, which was 2 years ago almost now. And so that changes over time. More people may be interested or less. And that leads me to the last one. What do we do if bidding doesn't occur? We don't lease the areas. And that has occurred before in the past. Sometimes in oil and gas, there are areas that are not bid on, and those we don't lease them.
That makes sense. And since we're in new territory here with wind energy, you probably don't have that track record.
At
least on this coast.
Yeah, I think I'm not positive, but I think we had some areas that didn't have a lot of interest in the Gulf of Mexico, which is not really known for its wind resource potential. Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you, Jamie and Jean. Let's go to Fran, followed by Amelia, and then we're scheduled to take a break before we get into our next agenda item. So Fran, go ahead.
Hi, good morning, Jean. I was wondering, where does or when does the impacts on ports and estuaries get figured in from the actual development of the, for the infrastructure, for the boats, for, the ships that take the, from the construction activities, from the deepening of channels, where or when does that get factored in? Thank you.
Sure. So the impacts associated with like the construction at a port or the deepening of channels to accommodate vessels going in and out or towing of particular structures would occur at the construction and operations plan stage, which is not something that we anticipate to happen until they develop surveys. So we would have to lease the areas first. After the leases are awarded, if that happens, then they would provide the survey plans. And at that time, they're going to describe in the construction and operations plan where they plan to operate out of, where they plan to construct out of. And then at that point, we'll know and we can evaluate, which is the second environmental review. So that has been done on the East Coast, and those are environmental impact statements, because those are some pretty large infrastructure.
So if you decide to lease, right, and then people develop these surveys and impact on the ports and estuary statement, and those impacts are unacceptable, do you cancel the lease? What happens then?
BOEM has the opportunity to request modifications to the proposed construction and operations plan from a developer if those are not acceptable. And if a developer is unwilling to do that, then we do not award any approvals for their construction and operations plans. So that's a major decision milestone from the Bureau. And just because a lessee has a lease does not mean that they are allowed to construct anything without our approval. And if we don't approve it, then they got to go back to the drawing board, so to speak.
So could you give me an example of a type of modification from on the East Coast that you've required for for the impacts on ports, or for leasing space or deepening of channels that have made impacts less or acceptable?
That's a great question, probably for one of my NEPA coordinators. I don't have really that information off the top of my head. We have always required modifications to date on every single construction operation plan we've gotten. So it's been very much an iterative process. So if you would like, Fran, I can, I'll write your name down, get your info from Andy, and then I can connect you with people who can probably give you a more detailed answer, if that would be okay.
Yeah, that would be great. I think there's a lot of people that would be interested in that. So maybe we can just have Andy field that for OPAC. Is that okay, Andy?
Sure, yeah. I also see a question from Rick Eichstad in the chat, which I think would be answered at the same time. So I'm happy to, pull some of those things together, communicate with Jean, and send that back out to the OPAC membership.
Sounds good. Thank you, Andy. Amelia, go ahead.
Hi, yes, thank you, Jean. And I first wanted to reiterate, thank you, Joe and Fran, for bringing up two of my concerns, which was modeling and also an economic analysis of nearshore impacts, which will be very important for non-consumptive recreators as well, especially in Coos Bay. I was hoping you could clarify, and I apologize if I missed something beforehand, but at what points past this leasing process will OPAC and I guess the state of Oregon have opportunities to engage in the process and with any potential leases? Or is that planned?
So there are multiple opportunities. So one of the things that BOEM is required under the Coastal Zone Management Act is any construction and operations plan would have to be reviewed by the state for consistency certification to ensure that the project that would be proposed is in compliance with the coastal management policies of the state. So the applicable policies, of course. And so that's a key input or milestone point, I think, for the state. The state is also developing the offshore wind roadmap, which I think would be very interesting to see where those touch points are in the future in the process, that we can have those discussions with the state. I think identifying those early, especially at key milestones, is very important. The NEPA process has the public comment process, but also in addition to that is really we'd be looking at sharing that information at the BOEM Oregon Task Force, and I'll come anytime and provide updates and listen to what OPAC has in terms of comments and concerns. So those are some of the things that I'm thinking about and really looking at, and I hope OPAC has some inputs for us in terms of what milestones in the future, if leasing does occur, they would be really interested in hearing from us.
Thank you, Jean.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you. We do have a couple more questions. Karina, I see your hand is raised, and Margaret had a question in the chat as well. But we are running a little bit behind. So I'll take Karina's, and then maybe we can answer Margaret's question in the chat. And Andy and Eva, you are tracking those, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
we got those. Thank you.
Okay. Karina, go ahead, and then we'll take a break.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up on the community benefits agreement, or bidding credits, actually, I should say, question. Are there any other kinds of bidding credits that are under consideration at this time? I've heard that there have been some proposals for things like a conservation or restoration type bidding credit. Just curious if BOEM is considering any other forms of bidding credits, and when, for the public to know when those kinds of suggestions might be most effectively communicated in public comment. Thank you.
Thanks, Karina. Those are really good questions. BOEM has on the East Coast used different types of bidding credits than the three that we're kind of thinking about, that we've used for California, that we know really are applicable for East Coast. but the East Coast has not chosen to do like a general community benefit agreement for local communities. They haven't done that. They've done something called a fisheries contingency fund. So they've proposed a fund that would go to fishing communities. I think it's actually specifically to fishermen or fishers, to be correct in my terminology. So for fishers, so it's a fishers contingency fund. The other thing that they've looked at is a natural conservation fund type. I don't know the specifics of it, but that did not move forward. There was, I think, some concerns by the East Coast states regarding how it would be applied. So those are two that have been used before on the East Coast that could potentially be bidding credits for Oregon. I mentioned the three that we are considering because those are what we considered for California. And we know that we had developers interested in doing those types of bidding credits. So there is success for it in the past on the West Coast. So that's kind of our rationale. The other thing is you asked about how would they be incorporated, or what was the second part of your question? I'm sorry.
What would be the best opportunity for public to provide comments on potential bidding credit ideas? So is that in when the announcement for the lease auction terms come out? Is that when the public comment on those would be useful? When would it be most useful to get those comments from the public?
It'd be most useful to get those comments from the public on the type of community benefit agreements during the proposed sale notice public comment period, which is 60 days under our regulatory process. I'm sure there's going to be a request for an extension, and BOEM will probably consider that. But it is mandated in our regulations that it's a minimum of 60 days. And so that would be the time that we would publish the proposed sale notice. So the proposed sale notice would have an actual proposed lease, including lease stipulations, and also a proposed like auction format. And in the proposed auction format would be those bidding credits. So if there are bidding credits that say an OPAC member would like to see rather than the other ones that we may provide, that would be the time during that public comment period to provide that to us.
Thank you.
Sure.
Great. Thank you, Karina. Thank you, Jean. I know we went a little bit over time, so I want to check in with Ramfis and Heather, our next presenters, and see if we could take a 10-minute break and if that would be okay with you guys. I'm not sure of your time schedule.
It's okay with me, Susan. This is Heather.
Okay. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break and come back at 10:40, well, now 10:41. Hi, everybody. I know it's only 10:40, but maybe we can take another 30 seconds and get everybody back. When you come back, if you can turn on your camera or give us a thumbs up so we know that you're here, we can get our next presenters teed up and ready to go. And for anybody who's still on the line, if you're interested in making public comment, please put your name in the chat that you'd like to do that. And so far, I think we have 3, maybe 4 people who wanted to make public comment, but I wanted to make sure we have that option for all of you. So. Okay, I have 10:41 and Andy has started screen sharing. And there we go. We got the recording going again. Thank you, Jean, and thank you everyone for a good discussion on Oregon's offshore wind areas and the next process. What's next up in the process? I'm sure we're all keenly attuned to that. And now we have our Oregon Offshore Wind Roadmap panel. As other people have talked about earlier this morning, there was an informal work group put together to work on a roadmap with exit ramp considerations. So I will turn it over to Heather and Ramphis to introduce yourselves and discuss the offshore energy roadmap with exit ramps.
Thanks, Susan. My name's Heather Mann. I'm the director of the Midwater Trawlers Cooperative based in Newport, Oregon. Represent 33 trawl fishing vessels that fish from California up to Alaska. And one of the conveners of the informal work group. Ramphis and I are going to sort of split this presentation. I'm going to start and give a little bit about the history of how this came to be. And then Ramphis is going to dig into the details a little bit more of the actual roadmap, what it is and what it's not. Ramphis, do you want to introduce yourself first and then I'll start?
Yeah, thanks, Heather. Hi, everyone. Happy Monday. My name is Ramphis Giantino Viatoro. I am the Oregon Policy Manager with Blue Green Alliance, which is a national organization founded between the United Steelworkers and Sierra Club. And our mission is aimed to address environmental challenges while creating good quality jobs. And yeah, happy to be here and yeah, glad to present here with Heather. Heather, I'll kick it back to you.
Thanks, Ramphis. Maybe move to the next slide, please. Great. So I want to just take a few minutes to talk a little bit about the background and how this came about. So I have been working on offshore wind issues for the last couple of years with Governor Brown's office prior to Governor Kotek. And once Governor Kotek was elected, I immediately started reaching out to the transition team and her office, trying to get engaged on where we were going with offshore wind. At the same time, I was attending some meetings hosted by Oriana Magnera, which some of you may know, about siting renewable energy projects. And this was on terrestrial ground. And that's where I met Ramphis for the first time. And through that process, Ramphis had suggested a small group of us spend some time getting to know each other and understanding what was important to various groups like fishing and labor and renewable advocates and whatnot. And so that's where I first met Nicole. So Ramphis, Nicole, and I were talking and trying to educate each other about what was important to us and sort of complaining about the BOEM process to some degree. And flash forward to Karin from the governor's office, reaching out to us and having conversations with the three of us on what could Oregon do that could be better than the way the BOEM process was unfolding. And so that's sort of how this got started. we wanted to talk about how do we bring people together in an informal way, so that we're not stymied, if you will, by an overly bureaucratic process. How can we get people to the table to talk about things? So we invited a number of different groups to the table, and you can see here on that slide, the process was never meant to be exclusive. It was meant to be efficient. And so we thought we would bring a lot of folks together, have these conversations. We called it this informal working group, but we always knew that there would be, if we were successful, that there would be a very inclusive state process, which is hopefully where we're at now. And I believe whether it was Andy or someone else from DLCDC saying that this outreach effort associated with writing the Oregon roadmap will be one of the most one of the greatest public outreach projects the state has undertaken, and it would be very robust, and that is something that's really important to us. And to those of you who weren't at the table that had wanted to be, there is that opportunity. So we decided also to have Oregon Consensus be our facilitator instead of leaving it to Ramfis, myself, and Nicole. We wanted to be able to fully engage. And yes, we have coordinated, but having Oregon Consensus come on board and help us has made a world of difference in getting to where we're at right now. And you could see from this list of the groups that were at the table during this informal process, and then all the different agencies that were available for advising the group. Next slide, please. So we had a few things from the beginning that were important to us, and that was putting a roadmap together, the considerations for a roadmap that looked at the whole coast, not just Southern Oregon, where the wind is the strongest, but looking at the whole coast to try to avoid disrupting fishing or other types of things that are ongoing in the ocean, whether that's recreating or the wave energy project, whatever else is happening. And then we wanted to look at the entire span of things, from the platforms in the ocean all the way to where they connect to the grid, and really through consensus try to identify where we have common desires, like safety at sea, regardless of who it is. If you're a turbine worker, a fisherman operating near turbines, like safety at sea is paramount. And so we started with that sort of low-hanging fruit of what are the things that we can all agree with. And then through consensus, kind of figure out what could we compromise on, or how could we work together to identify at least what needs to be considered in an Oregon roadmap. Next slide, please. So this is really important, and I'm going to actually just read you the bullet points and talk about them. So the group was and is exploring the opportunities and impacts, learning from different perspectives on floating offshore wind. This has been really, really key, and I think we've all learned something in the process. I know I have. And then crafting our considerations, our themes, our topics, and key questions the roadmap should include. And that was done through consensus. What the group is not is a decision-making body. We were never going to be saying offshore wind is or is not for Oregon. We were not going to create any positions on floating offshore wind. And then the group is not building the roadmap. DLCD is the one building it. The roadmap considerations is a document that, like I said, considers all the themes, the topics, and the key questions, but we're not the group that's writing that roadmap. Next slide. And I'll turn it to Ramfis to talk here, I think, about the details within the roadmap.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. Yeah, again, I think as just want to reiterate, as we're looking through this, the informal work group, again, is providing what we consider roadmap considerations, not the actual roadmap. So that, again, will be work conducted by DLCD. But what our hope here as we were working with this informal work group was, again, we went in deliberation and through a consensus model, came up with what we wanted to provide as a recommendation for considerations for the governor's office and DLCD as it develops its roadmap. So one, I think it's just a general executive summary to why an offshore wind roadmap with exit ramps for Oregon. So as we talk about an offshore wind roadmap as shorthand, we are including the consideration of an exit ramp. So it's not, again, this is a pro-wind document or an anti-wind document. It is a document aimed to be inclusive and balanced with a diverse set of stakeholders and perspectives. So we're trying to say here is a roadmap for pursuing what are the opportunities and impacts, but exit ramps are, again, where are there considerations for pauses and indefinite pauses, where there are pauses for concern, or where there are unknowns in the exploration for offshore wind development. Second, the Oregon context for offshore wind potential. So we're trying to cover, again, why are we in the state of Oregon pursuing offshore wind? It was really important just to provide some context to explore, one, Oregon's wind resource being really great in the southern Oregon coast. Two, just consideration of meeting Oregon's 100% clean energy mandates. As well as, and I think this has been a good debate for conversation, has been just the levelized cost of energy and understanding the potential for, again, why, BOEM or the federal government is, again, exploring offshore wind. As we laid out roadmap objectives, many of the principles that Heather mentioned earlier, we want to try to capture a balance of different views and perspectives. So our, again, objectives of what we want, again, DLCD and other stakeholders to consider in development is how are we connecting Oregon's decisions to regional and national context? Again, understanding that Oregon is unique from the rest of the world, but knowing that we are connected to a regional and national energy markets, that we have local concerns, local resources, local voices that we need to take in considerations. Additionally, how are we making decisions that are equitable, transparent, coordinated regionally, based on sound information, and that it's a product of meaningful engagement with affected communities and tribes. So again, I think when we originally met, one of the most important things was about relationship building, knowledge sharing, and just identifying potential common ground. And I think it was really important that we, in any pursuit or any conversation on offshore wind, it becomes a state policy of the state to consider what are the voices on the ground, thinking about and making sure that we're meaningfully engaging impacted communities and tribes. And additionally, around decision making, we wanted another additional objective was how do we make decisions that are place-based, integrated, adaptive, and strategic. And so as we pursue this work, again, how are we thinking about ensuring, again, this concept of place-based decision-making, folks closest to these projects? How are we thinking about it from an angle of being integrated and adaptive as we learn and hear from folks and stakeholders from this information? Cross-cutting lenses to apply to decisions. So this, again, I actually may have flipped these between cross-cutting and objectives, but again, how do we achieve? I did flip these. My apologies. I did flip the objectives and cross-cutting lenses. I just covered the cross-cutting cutting lenses, but on objectives, just thinking about how do we achieve our clean energy markets? How do we protect the environment, ocean systems, and protect birds, fish, and wildlife? How do we protect cultural and archaeological resources? tribal subsistence, I'm having a challenge with that word, and culturally significant view sheds. Additionally, how do we support and protect coastal communities and towns and protect existing seafood providers and develop Oregon's offshore energy workforce? So those are some of the objectives. I may have flipped, in my apologies, on the cross-cutting lenses. And I think we provide some recommendations for a roadmap implementation. And then we concluded with process summary. I'll just summarize here on the process in this is we tried to capture as many voices and viewpoints in this while trying to maintain a singular voice. I want to say that at the end of the day, we made and came through a consensus model for what we're recommending. That's not to say there wasn't rigorous debate and conversation here. Can we flip to the next slide? Oh, yeah, we did cover this. Here are the objectives again. I did cover this. Can we go to the next slide? Oh, yeah, here are the objectives again. Next slide. Here are the cross-cutting lenses. So again, connected to regional and national context, equitable, transparent, and the product of meaningful engagement with affected communities, place-based, integrative, adaptive, and open to exit ramps for pause on projects. Can we go to the next slide? So what's next? The roadmap considerations document should be ready soon in early May. We are finalizing and near final with our product. Again, as we noted, these are recommendations for consideration. DLCD will be leading the roadmap process and stakeholder engagement in that process. The group wanted to see if we could do better in listening and hearing multiple perspectives. We believe we did that. We tried our best to do that within our group. But again, I think we just want to know there was a lot of rigorous debate, rigorous conversation, and I think we did the best to capture all voices on their table. And we believe that the hard work remains ahead of us for us all. So I want to acknowledge in the backdrop of all this work, we were always looking beyond the current wind energy areas. But obviously, I think that those developments happened during our work. But I think we try to be adaptive and responsive and try to capture all voices through this process within the informal group. So I'll pause there. Heather, I don't know if I missed anything in my ramble, but hopefully I captured as much as our work. Anything you would add as we conclude here?
No, I think what I would add is just inviting, there are members of OPAC that did participate in our informal work group. If they wanted to add anything to the discussion that we might have missed or anything important that you want to add, but I think you covered it pretty well, Ramfis. In the chat, Fran had asked to see a copy of the roadmap considerations document. So I'm glad we included and let everybody know that it will be out in early May for everyone to take a look at. And so stay tuned for that. Apologies for not having it out sooner, but that rigorous debate and coming to consensus work actually took a little bit longer, and really appreciate the inputs of Tara and Karina and Susan and others for that process and helping us get to where we ended up. That's all I'd add.
Great. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Ramfis. As Heather mentioned, I was part of that group and several of the others of us were as well. It was difficult at times. I don't know that it would have been as successful without Bobby Cochran and Sophia, I'm blanking on her last name right now, from Oregon Consensus. It took some significant work, but we did. We came to consensus, and I think it was critical. This is something very good that I think we can hand off to the state to take from here, and I know I'm proud of it. So I'll just say that. Any other OPAC members who have questions or would like to speak to that, please put your hand up, and Joe, and followed by Karina.
Yeah, thanks so much for the overview, Heather and Ramphis. I just want to echo a little bit of Fran's comment that, I think that OPAC really does need to do a formal review of this document before it gets off the DLCD. So I would recommend that. I don't know if that means another OPAC meeting at some point in the summer, or just we could do it via email and have maybe, I think we do need to come together and discuss it, but I feel like just to keep this just to keep it transparent, as I think we all want, and there have been expressed concerns about that throughout this whole process, that we want to just make sure that all the constituents that are represented by OPAC have the ability to review this document and before it moves forward. So I'll just stop there.
Thanks, Joe. I, from my perspective, don't have an issue necessarily with that. I'd look to Oregon Consensus, who's probably the best to answer that, and how that would, working with your leadership, how that would work. I would just say that in terms of the next step, and maybe Andy can speak to this, it's not just guided by our considerations document. So it's my understanding, if there's some glaring omission of some sort or something like that, it can be picked up through DLCD when they're doing their process. But I do agree 100% about transparency. And part of the reason we have such angst about this process really is the lack of transparency with the BOEM process and what happens in that black box. So thanks for the comment.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Heather. Karina, followed by Amelia.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to echo some of the comments that were made about what the process was like sitting in with this informal working group, and how much mutual learning took place amongst the members. And I think it was a good process. I think the items in the roadmap considerations document that will be released will be really informative and help support the state's process. So just wanted to echo just support for this being a step, not the roadmap itself for Oregon. Joe, based on what you suggested, one idea, I'll just put this out for folks to listen to, is that let the work group finish their, release their document, and OPAC can take it under consideration, review it, and maybe make any recommendations that they would like to the governor regarding that document, just to keep the process moving and to allow it to come out, and for people to be able to review it. So, but not impeding the progress. That would be my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you, Karina. And I think that's a good topic of discussion for our future meeting scheduling. So keep that in mind. Amelia, followed by Andy.
Hi, yes. Thank you all for your work on the roadmap thus far. I think it's so important, and I agree with Joe, it's important for OPAC as well to be involved. I apologize if I missed something, but when I looked at the working group, I didn't notice any representation from ocean recreation, which is a very important part of actually Oregon's economic profile. And also, I was curious, how was the non-fishing recreational group engaged through the process thus far? And if they weren't, why were they not included so far? Thank you.
Yeah, so Amelia, thanks for those questions. And I've fielded similar ones from Charlie Plybon as well. We had recreational fishing represented, and I know that's not what you're talking about, but I do want to note that Richard Heap was there on behalf of recreational fishing. And as I said when I spoke earlier, this was not about being exclusive. It was about just being efficient. And we knew there's other groups as well that were not in at the table. I think that we've spoken with folks individually about what we were doing. I know I received input from just colleagues and friends of mine who are active in surfing and other recreating that have an interest both in renewable energy, but also in, marine reserves and protecting the ocean for recreating. And so I would say that the informal work group was informed informally by the conversations that many of us had. There was never an attempt to keep the thoughts of recreational users out of the process. And in fact, I think that there's a real great opportunity now at DLCD. As I said earlier, Andy or someone said it will be the most robust outreach project the state's ever undertaken, or one of the most. And I expect that the recreational user's voice, similar to, like homeowners and people that live on the beach, they weren't at the table. We just couldn't have everybody there, but it was not a conscious decision to keep recreating folks out at all. And I would note that in the chat, there's also a question from Bob Main saying that there were no municipalities, state government or local government at the table either. We did not have elected officials come. We wanted this to be not government. This was informal kind of discussion. I'll note that we did ask Association of Counties to join, and they did not have the capacity to do so. And Bob, in your comments, you note that the 3 Southern Oregon counties where the projects would be based, but I would just say that all counties are impacted, not just the southern ones in terms of fishing. And that's one thing we learned through this. I think people learn through this process, because people would say, well, you're in Newport, what do you care? Well, because when my boats leave Newport, they turn left and they fish down in those call areas. It impacts all the counties up and down the coast. But we did not have elected officials coming beyond a few people that were associated with ports. So
Thank
Amelia,
you.
yeah, I'm happy to talk more about it. But again, I know that you will be very involved moving forward.
Yes, thank you. I look forward to recreational users being more involved with the process. And thank you for your work. This roadmap is so important moving forward.
Thanks.
Thanks, Amelia. Thank you, Heather. Andy.
Yeah, thank you. So I do want to commend the group that helped to pull this roadmap with exit ramps consideration document together, and talk a little bit about kind of the role of state agencies on the group, because I don't know that was really referenced yet. And we approached our role on this group as purely advisory, from a technical perspective. So if they had questions, we would answer them. We had a couple of presentations that we gave to the group, but really the document, when it's released, is the voice of those other entities who've all come together. And I just want to stress the importance of that for the state. And I will be speaking next about our thinking, or our early thinking, related to House Bill 4080. But without this group coming together, forming a really collaborative effort, and supporting in our short legislative session the work that's going to be needed for the state to adequately address this issue, it really wouldn't have happened without this group of individuals. So I just want to publicly thank them again for all their hard work. I will speak next with a little bit more detail about what our thoughts are from DLCD, but wanted to just relay that, one of my concerns when I joined as an advisor to this group was transparency, and we do know and recognize that really comprehensive engagement around the topic means lots of different things to lots of different people that come from backgrounds with different perspectives. And so we need the state to have that kind of a process, I think, so that we can have that healthy dialogue about what compatible uses of ocean space are, what are the standards and enforceable policies for our program we want to bring to bear on the question of whether or not any future proposed project is actually consistent with Oregon policies and the vision for what we have for our ocean health. So I'll stop there, and I think Peggy had her hand up next.
Yep, thank you, Andy. And you're right. Excuse me. A lot of us struggled with the transparency issue, but we recognized that, you know, a small group, a nimble group that could meet. I think we met every 2 weeks for the last, or pretty much every 2 weeks for the past 6 to 9 months. So it was a lot of work. We tried to remain small and nimble and thinking outside the box. So it was a real learning process too. So Peggy, followed by Tara.
Yes, thank you, Andy, very much. And I just want to reiterate, I love this concept of people coming together to form a consensus around an issue that really is in everyone's public interest, especially for those people who live along the coast, but more importantly for the state as a whole. And I really am concerned about having BOEM be the bully in the china shop that is just going to dictate their timeline over and above everything that I have heard here today. Is just screaming that they are, I just don't want to see this process get rushed. And I don't want to see BOEM steamrolling over any of the processes that people in the state are clearly screaming about to slow down and to think about this and to actually talk about it to a lot of diverse interest groups who should be heard. And I think a consensus approach is absolutely the best way to go. And I really want to thank the two people who just gave this presentation. That what a great idea. And for the OPAC members who are on this team, on this committee, right on, keep going, do it.
So Peggy, thank you for that. I want to admit that Maine did a roadmap, which is what I had brought to the group and said we should do something like this for Oregon. So they started the process with bringing different people together. And I think to form that roadmap. And then really, I think a lot of credit goes to Ramfis for kind of pulling us together to learn about each other before we got into the heavy duty stuff of a roadmap and set that basis. And then I totally agree with what you're saying, and I'm actually going to address that in public comment about BOEM. So I'll save that for my public comment. And I did want to respond to Andy in terms of, well, one, we are so lucky in the state of Oregon to have Andy. He is amazing at his job. He is thoughtful and super smart and just fantastic. So we are so lucky that he's part of this process. In terms of transparency, we did hear those concerns. Like Susan said, a lot of us had concerns about transparency. Oregon Consensus, as a response to that, the group had asked to post our meeting notes. And that is available on the Oregon Consensus website. And we'll put that in the chat for folks that can track some of our progress and our meeting notes. Sorry, Tara, I think you were next.
Yep, thank you for that. And we did, as part of the process, we did try to look beyond the current wind energy areas, which was tough because there was a lot of decisions and a lot of announcements and a lot of news about the wind energy areas, you know, that came out while we were meeting. So it was, you know, tough to try and separate those two and look, you know, look beyond that. But I think we did. Tara, go ahead.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, I just wanted to respond some to Joe and Amelia and on OPAC's involvement going forward, and that is a discussion we are going to have right after lunch, as Susan mentioned earlier. So I think that's a very important time for OPAC to think about, how we want to review this document, how we want to engage in the roadmap process going forward, and what we really view our role as. So just wanted to flag that there is an opportunity here for us to take all of these various things happening and have a discussion about how OPAC wants to engage further and how we envision our role. So just putting that out there, that it is on agenda, and we will have a much more in-depth discussion about that after lunch.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I couldn't find my unmute button. Okay, any other questions from OPAC members before we move on to Andy's presentation that takes us to the next step in this process? Not seeing any. Okay, thank you, Heather. Thank you, Ramfis, and thank you, Nicole. I know Nicole Hughes from Renewable Northwest could not be on here today, but it was really Nicole, Ramfis, and Heather's leadership that got us all together. So thanks to you. And Andy, you're up.
It would be helpful if I actually unmuted myself.
It's a Monday.
Yeah. So again, for everyone's benefit, I'm Andy Lanier, and Marine Affairs Coordinator for the Oregon Coastal Management Program, which is housed within the Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development. I first want to touch on House Bill 4080. And I will say that in my experience working for the state on ocean policy and planning, this really is an unprecedented investment in our program. I have never seen the legislature act as quickly as it did to respond to this topic. And I will be describing in a little bit more detail kind of what this includes. But for the legislative work that happened in the short session, it's busier than I've ever been in responding to requests and appearing at committee meetings where there was a chance that questions would come up as related to, well, what was this roadmap and how would DLCD be a part of it? And I first want to say that the legislation, which was brought to the fore by Rep. Graber, was really first and foremost about the inclusion of strong labor standards in any workforce development projects related to offshore wind. That was really one of the driving issues. And the concept of a roadmap and work on the roadmap was kind of added into that thinking. And the idea was, before there are any leases or any pre-sale notices, that the state would be able to bring those strong labor standards to the fore. And the bill was successful in doing that. The other thing that the bill did was it provided support for DLCD to be the leadership agency on the next chapter in the actual development of a roadmap. So when we talk about transparency, when we talk about open public process, really that is going to be something that we spend a lot of time and energy thinking about and focusing on and understanding how to move forward on. But to do that, DLCD asked for capacity. And we asked for 2 permanent positions to support us in our work in development of the roadmap and then in implementation of the roadmap following actually developing it. Those positions are a roadmap project coordinator, somebody to really lead kind of the broad comprehensive group and the contractors who we are going to bring on board to help us with that public engagement. But also then somebody to lead on the assessment of Oregon's enforceable policies as they relate to offshore wind, with recommendations about what rulemaking processes or other policy processes may be necessary to actually make changes or amendments to our existing policy and regulatory framework. So this was passed with the conclusion of the legislative session in March. I think it was close to March 15th or so. So we've had a little bit over a month to think about, how we begin to turn our agency ship to address the needs related to building a roadmap for the state. And I want to say explicitly that the standards that were included in the roadmap really came from the perspectives that the informal offshore wind working group shared. Right. So I think these came directly from the roadmap piece, and they speak to the comprehensive engagement that I think and that others think the state needs to have, so that we really have a conversation and we bring everyone along to understand the decision-making processes that are happening, where engagement in those processes can happen and should occur for Oregon to be able to have a strong voice in thinking about offshore wind, not really knowing yet what a project is going to look like, right? Because there's many potential configurations of projects, and there's a lot of uncertainty as to where onshore any activities associated with a project may be, and how those would relate to the existing land use policy framework and uses that are already in those places that Oregonians and others care strongly about. So I'm not going to read this list. It's directly from the legislation, but it just speaks to that really broad, comprehensive engagement that we believe needs to happen. And we are proud to be asked to lead this effort on behalf of the state. So what we've done here is a little brainstorming and a little bit of thinking to put a couple of different timelines together for you. You heard from Jean Thurston earlier this morning, the projected BOEM leasing schedule for leases that may be issued as a part of an auction later this year. So that really could begin at the end of this month and take us to the middle of fall or winter before leases happen.
Andy, could I interrupt you real quickly? I think we're still on the intro slide.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Eva. Let me try and share again. Okay, are you seeing the standards slide?
Not yet, not for me.
No.
Let me do a stop and reshare. Okay, are you seeing a timeline slide?
No.
There it is, Andy.
Yep.
It's just there's a little delay. I think there was a big delay. Okay, I'm back, folks. Apologies for the technical interruption. Let's try this again. Are you seeing the slide?
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Again, one of the things that is going to be challenging for DLCD is our
Andy, we lost audio.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Andy, if you're talking.
Yeah, I would agree with what Laurel said. Maybe just turn your cameras off for a moment while we
Yeah.
try and work on bandwidth.
Sorry, folks. I keep getting kicked out of my meeting.
So you'll have to start again. You said something about a challenge. That's all we heard.
Thank you. Yes.
And start the recording again, Andy. There.
I am getting going. I think this is a byproduct of the fact that I'm streaming this, because I've never had this problem before.
Do you want
Bear
me to
with
try
me,
to
folks.
record it, Andy?